going to be a slightly different talk than I normally would give. When Lorna called me, she wanted me to talk about this conference that I organized a few years ago in the Eastern Canadian Arctic. So I'm going to highlight that conference because it was really different, and it took a lot of time, and it brought a lot of circumpolar scientists together, and it was in a really unique part of the Eastern Arctic. So I hope you enjoy the talk, and I really want to tell you about the Northern Research Basins Symposium and Conference because it's so important, it's so dear to Arctic hydrologists. So before I start, I just really want to acknowledge the photographer that was on the trip with us. He's Robert McKenna. He was the husband of one of my colleagues, so it was great. And most of the great slides are from him. Some of the other pictures that you'll see are my own. Okay, so I'll give you a short outline of the talk. I'm going to talk about the history of the Northern Research Basins Symposium and Workshop that's been going on now for about 38 years. And then I'm going to talk about my own conference that I organized, 17th NRB, which traveled from Iqaluit to Pangnirtung to Kuujjuaq. And I want to, hopefully I can convince you of the importance of these types of meetings as well as its legacy. Okay, so this is a quote from a colleague, and he gave a history of the NRB and during my conference in 2009. And this conference, you can see the quote. It says, "Not an organization, nor is it funded by any international agency. Its success is entirely due to the strong interest and commitment of an ever-evolving group of Northern Basin researchers." So it's like this group, a circle of friends, a bunch of Arctic hydrologists across the circumpolar Arctic that come together every couple of years. Okay, we might be an informal group, but we have very formal objectives. So one of our objectives is to gain a better understanding of hydrologic processes, particularly those in which snow, ice, and frozen ground have a major influence on the hydrologic regime and water balance. To provide data for the development and testing of transposable models which may be applied to water and land resource programs. So many of us are field scientists. We go out, we do a lot of work on glaciers, on snow covers, in wetlands, and then we take that data, make it available to modelers. Many of us are modelers as well. We also want to assess and predict the effect of human activities on the hydrologic regime in northern environments. So we're concerned with climate change. We're concerned with climate variability and the impacts that it has on our northern environments. We also want to provide information for the improvement and standardization of measurement techniques and also the network design in northern regions. So we try and standardize our precipitation gauges, how we take stream flow measurements. We also try to encourage the exchange of information, and we do this on a regular basis, every couple of years, and also in between meetings as well. Okay, now this slide here, and I've circled my face. You're probably wondering why. I just want to show you in 1999, I broke into the old men's club. There's not a lot of Arctic female hydrologists. So I was their token female, and they made jokes about it earlier on. And my reason for showing this, and I'll show you in a few minutes, it'll come to haunt me, is, well anyways, first of all, Canada has a Canada Northern Research Working Group, which is under the Canadian Geophysical Union Hydrology section. We have a chief delegate and we have a deputy delegate, and every 2 years those two people choose 8 other members to go on the NRB symposium and workshop. So you're invited guests. And we try to select people that come from different parts of Canada, northern parts of Canada, or they do work in northern parts of Canada, and they have certain expertise. For instance, I work up in the Canadian high Arctic, so I have expertise in snow hydrology and wetland hydrology. I'm not sure. Here, I'll show you. I'll use this clicker here. This fella here, Chris Spence, he is a hydrologist working in the subarctic in the Canadian Shield. This fella here works for Environment Canada. He's a climate change modeler, so we'll forgive him for that. And Phil Marsh has expertise in snow hydrology, and he works in northwest part of Canada. Rick Janowitz is a water manager in the Yukon, and Minku Wu, my former supervisor, is probably the best permafrost hydrology, snow hydrology, Arctic hydrology that there's ever been, and he won't let us ever forget that. He's a good guy. So anyways, Canada has its own rules for sending people to these meetings. As you can see in this slide here, there has been lots of meetings. They started in 1975, and we've tried to cover different parts of the circumpolar Arctic. Canada has hosted 3 meetings, and I was involved in the 17th one here. I just want to tell you a little bit more about the NRB, and I have to. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little older here, and I have to read my notes here. So the NRB Symposia was established in 1975 as part of the International Hydrologic Program by the National Committees of Canada, Denmark, so that's Greenland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, the USA, and the USSR. The regional working group was set up to foster research on river basins initially in northern latitudes, and unlike other snow and ice conferences, this NRB is intended specifically for Arctic environments. Iceland joined our working group in 1992, and Russia took over the role of the USSR shortly after. Countries with polar programs are also eligible to be associate members. So we have 2 associate members. They're the UK and Japan. And so these meetings, symposia, are held every 2 years, and they alternate between North America and Europe. We just had one in Eastern Arctic, or no, sorry, Eastern Norway, so that was the 18th NRB. Okay, before we go to our symposiums, every delegate must submit a paper, a 10-page paper, and it's put into a proceedings, and then it's put into a book before we go to the meeting. So this is the cover of our proceedings, which took place from Iqaluit to Pangnirtung to Kuujjuaq. We went from August 12th to 18th, 2009. Okay, all of our presentations are also submitted to refereed journals for publications, and in many cases, many of our workshops, all the work for our workshops are also published here. We're pretty proud of this. This is the International Association of Hydrological Science. We had a workshop out in Victoria hosted by the US government, the Canadian government, and this book, this data within this book, has been the platform for some Arctic planning strategy sort of studies for the future. Okay, this is the best part about the NRBs. We just don't sit in a room and discuss stuff. We go to see the landscape. We go to see what it's like. And for me, going to Greenland in 2003 was like one of those moments. I had no idea what it was going to feel like to be up on the Greenland ice sheet. And every time I talk to my students, I get so excited about that. I'm sure they're not as excited as me. I couldn't believe how rough it was. I couldn't believe how much sediment was on it. And I couldn't believe that Volkswagen would make a road all across the Greenland ice sheet to test their cars. And that's what they do. It's amazing. I mean, we learned a lot more than that about the ice sheet. But we've traveled to Sweden. I've been able to travel to northern Sweden. This is north of Luleå. It's just gorgeous. We were in Norway this past year. on the eastern fjords. We traveled by cruise ship, boat, bus. We were basically planes, trains, and automobiles. And I showed this slide to a helicopter pilot. I had to go back up to the high Arctic after I got back from Norway. And I showed him this slide, and I thought, wow, this is an amazing picture. And he said, we have that in Newfoundland. And I'm like, whoa. And I've never been to Newfoundland. Well, I've been to St. John's, but the bars, I think it's John Street or something. But, you know, I've missed this. And this is in our own country. It's amazing. Russia. This is north of St. Petersburg, Petrozavodsk, and we did whitewater rafting down the Kuujjuaq River. So we learn a lot. We try to learn about the others' environments, and this is important when we make our own measurements, when we interpret our own data, because we can say, hey, that can apply to Sweden or that can apply to Russia, and we have that background. We also look at how each of us measure things, precipitation gauges. Many of us, of course, are involved in snowmelt hydrology and glacier hydrology, and much of that water is used for hydroelectric power, so we often go to hydroelectric stations. We also like to learn about the culture and the history of the countries that we visit. Sorry about that. So, and sometimes we get a little tired. That's Glenn Liston. Is it going to go? Okay. And of course, we eat a lot of food, and we probably drink too much too. And this is Norway. I'm not so sure I was too happy about this goat's head here. I think I did more drinking than eating here. Yeah. Yeah, it was something. Apparently it's a delicacy. So the reason I circled my face back in those slides is that they came to me, the delegates came to me in 2005, and they said, Kathy, you've been to NRB meetings since 1999. So you've had lots of fun, you've learned lots, you've been to workshops. It's payback time. And I said, oh, what's that mean? Well, we would like you to be chief delegate, which was, of course, a great honor because I'm the first Canadian female scientist, hydrologic scientist, to be a chief delegate for Canada. And by the way, you have to organize the 2009 meeting. Oh, okay, thanks. And by the way, we want to go to the Eastern Canadian Arctic because we haven't been there, so we want you to organize that. Well, there's no buses, there's no roads in the Eastern Canadian Arctic, and I looked at planes and costs of flying people into isolated areas are very expensive. The cheapest way to do it was by a cruise ship. And so this cruise ship is, well, I don't think they have this ship right now, but this was through Cruise North. And it was a Russian cruise ship, and it's called the Lyuba Orlova, and the translation was the love boat. I said, isn't that great? I've got the love boat. Now, I just show you briefly the captain of the ship. He was from Kazakhstan, and my own student who was on this trip, PhD student, she was from Kazakhstan, and they were both from the same town, so that was really neat. Now, the other reason for selecting this ship was that it was Inuit owned and it's operated by the Makivik Corporation out of Kuujjuaq. So most of the guide leaders, they were all from northern communities, all across Canada's north. So, you know, I felt good about that. It was also a smaller ship, so it could get it down into Kuujjuaq. Some of the bigger cruise ships can't do that. And for the size of all the people that went on the cruise, we had the ship to ourselves. So that was great too. I should also say that one of the guide leaders, an ecologist, came from York University in biology, and the bartender was from York University too. So we're getting jobs. It's good. The 17th NRB conference, I'll just go over some of the importance of that. For the themes, one of ours was managing hydrological uncertainty in high latitude environments. There's lots of uncertainty that we have. We have uncertainty with our measurements, we have uncertainty with our equipment, We have uncertainty with climate change, climate variability. Our guest speaker was Dr. Larry Hintzman. He's the director of the International Arctic Research Center out of the IARC, University of Alaska Fairbanks. A lot of us are terrestrial hydrologists. We work on the land, but because of the Arctic islands, because of the north, we're influenced by the ocean. And we felt that we didn't have a very good understanding between ocean-land interactions. So we invited an oceanographer, a physical oceanographer, to come on to the meeting and to enlighten us about Arctic Ocean circulation, thermoclines, and how river flow from terrestrial areas can influence circulation as well. So our guest speaker was Dr. Robbie McDonald from the Arctic, from Fisheries Oceans out of Victoria, and he was a great guy. For the first time, we held an open house with local Inuit in Pangnirtung, and York University helped us supplied, funding for that particular workshop. So I was very pleased with that. We talked about northern water resource issues. We talked about climate change impacts on those areas. And Pangnirtung had an extreme event, a rain-on snowmelt flood in 2008, so we talked to the elders about that as well, and I'll come back to that in a minute. We also had other task force reports that we looked at. Now, you can get the impression that these types of meetings are quite costly, and they are. So the NRB meetings are highly subsidized by each host country. So this was the hardest thing that I had to do. I had to go out and drum up enough money to subsidize this meeting. Overall, I raised about approximately $140,000, both in direct funds and in-kind funds as well. Now this was tough because I signed the contract for the ship at the beginning of January 2008, and the US and Canadian dollar were on parity, or the Canadian dollar was better. And then our economy crashed, and it went down to 73 cents, and oh, that was not good. So, but then the dollar came back up again, and we did okay. We didn't make money, we didn't lose money. So if you want something done well and on budget, you ask a woman. Sorry, anyways, I couldn't help that. All right. So there was also, I should say, a tremendous amount of pressure to make this an amazing conference because 7 years before, or whenever the last one was done, it was in the Western Arctic, and Environment Canada handled it, and they had tons of money there, and they flew these guys around Mount Logan, and they had a lot of money, so there was a lot of pressure on me. I'm going to talk about the environment too. So that's an important thing for these NRB meetings, is to tell all the delegates what our part of the Arctic is like. So the first day, we flew from Montreal up to Iqaluit, and then we got onto the ship. Now the tidal range in Frobisher Bay here is quite high. So on this particular day, it's about 6.7 meters. So that's why we had to take the Zodiacs pretty far out to the ship, and we had to leave by a certain time. So our route here, I'm not sure if you can see it very well, is up. We're going to go down here and then up to Pangnirtung. A few other things about Iqaluit. So it's the capital of Nunavut. At the time that Nunavut was made a territory, it had a population of about 7,500 people. It's probably upwards of about 10,000 people now. It receives about half the precipitation that Ottawa would have. It's called a dry Arctic climate. It's at the fringes between the low Arctic and the high Arctic. It's continuous permafrost environment as well. Okay, so we're on the boat, and we are coming across icebergs. These icebergs, of course, are calving off of the Greenland ice sheet, because Greenland is right beside Baffin Island. Okay, here's another shot of icebergs. So we traveled beside a lot of icebergs along the way. Now, this is one of the sites we came to, was a Keckerton Island whaling station. I'm going to talk about the history a little bit later, but I just want you to get the impression of what the landscape is like. So there's no tall trees here, very rocky, Canadian Shield, old Canadian Shield area. There is some tundra vegetation here, so thick, sort of mossy areas, some vegetation. We also had Professor Conrad Hydrologic, Professor Emeritus in my geography department. I was very happy that Conrad could come because he's a historical geographer, and this is one of his areas of expertise. So he was delighted to come, and I was really glad to have him too, because he could tell us all about the history of these different places. This is Penny Ice Cap, and it's just at the end of Pangnirtung Fjord, and it's contained within the Iqaluit National Park. It's the southernmost ice cap along Baffin Island. It's more southern, but in many cases it acts more like a polar type of glacier because it's so high in elevation. I'll show you some more slides of that in a bit. This is Pangnirtung. Pangnirtung is located here, right at the beginning of the Pangnirtung Fjord. It's located about a good hour's boat ride from the Iqaluit National Park. The population here is probably around 1,500. I don't think it's any more than 2,000 people. The tides are quite high here as well. It's a beautiful area. It's been called Switzerland of the Arctic. It's known for its, I don't know if my coat's here or my hat's here. It's known for its weaving, so my hat's a little old, but they have some beautiful weaving there and printmaking and artists as well. Okay, this is an amazing, the next day we traveled up to the end of Pangnirtung Fjord, just outside of Iqaluit National Park. And this scenery, it took my breath away, and I've seen a lot of beautiful areas in Canada's Arctic. So I'll just show you a few slides here. So there's Penny Ice Cap there. So if you ever want to go on a trip, this is the place to go to. Okay, I'll just say a little bit about Iqaluit National Park, and it translates into the land that never melts. So this is a national park. I think maybe it was the last one that was, might not be. Anyways, it's the southern park on Baffin Island. It contains about 200,000 kilometers squared in area. So this contains some of the highest mountains in the Canadian Shield, some of the highest rocks, very deep fjords where the glaciers have incised the valleys. It protects a path that the Inuit used to travel across for many years, about 1,000 years. So it protects that path as well. And what else? It contains, or it gets some of the highest precipitation in the Canadian Arctic archipelago. All right, Penny Ice Cap again. Just an amazing area, just gorgeous. And here we are in the Zodiac, taking people out to the end of the pass, and we're going to do some hiking there. And some of the walls just go straight up, and there's waterfalls like come down. So this is outside of Iqaluit National Park. We weren't able to go into the national park because there's a lot of permitting and it would take too long and we didn't have a lot of time. But for the hardy souls, they went and climbed up onto a hill which looked up on the Penny Ice Cap here. So this is just a glacial stream up top of one of the forelands. Kuujjuaq. I was going to talk about food later, but we had a barbecue after that hike, and we had lots of food. Just like is tradition in NRB, you have lots of food and lots of drink. So this was lots of fun because we had a barbecue out on the ship. But what was nice is that we had this barbecue outside, and the ship sailed very slowly back down the fjord again. So for me, this was my favorite part because I could kind of relax after, you know, worrying about, we had about 70 people overall on this ship, and they came from every circumpolar country, and we had about 60 scientists overall. And to make sure that they got on the plane and they got all their luggage and they got into the right room, and yes, this for me was a very good time to know that everything was going all right. So what was the temperature when you were outside? When we were here, the temperature was maybe about 8 or 9 degrees. So it's not too bad. So this is in middle of August. Yeah, middle of August. So we've got our hats on and our coats. And because we are in a marine environment, so we traveled in zodiacs. Oh, here I can use this as well. Oh, sorry. So this is a bergy bit, so another iceberg that's calved off and broken, melted down. And just lots of seabirds around. And this is Iqaluit Island, and it's the largest island in the Ungava Bay, and it's made out of limestone, and you have thick-billed murres. This is the highest concentration of this bird colony here. And when you're traveling in the zodiac, you have to make sure that you don't look up and open your mouth. Some people got splattered. And it smells quite bad, the guana. But it was amazing scenery. Very thin fog, but you could still see a lot. So these scientists saw a lot about our landscape as well as our marine environment as well. Of course, the Europeans wanted to see a polar bear. Where I work, my site is called Polar Bear Pass, so I see polar bears all the time. So I'm not too crazy about seeing polar bears. So here we have polar bears. This was on Lower Savage Islands here when the cruise ship came here, and we took the Zodiacs over to these islands. There's lots of open water at this time of year, so the polar bears need sea ice to hunt for seals. And when there's no ice, then they go on land. So he's up trying to scavenge, maybe trying to find some seabird eggs or seabirds or whatever. So I think we were annoying him. He was quite a nice bear, though. Nice looking bear. Oh. Yeah, there we are. There's another shot. Okay. This is when we were on Iqaluit Island, and again, I was in the middle of a science session, and the guide said, oh, there's a bear to the, I don't know, the starboard or the port side. I can never remember what side. And then nobody was listening to me, and they all went outside, and they all stood outside to look at the bear. And then finally we got in the Zodiacs, and we went over to see the bears. And then we saw one bear that he was having a fight with another bear. And I felt really bad because I said, could you go over? Like our guides had guns. I said, can you go over and put him out of his misery? And they said, no, they weren't allowed. So, and this bear would raise its head up, and it probably would die within a short period of time. Lots of blood loss. And so this is the bear that it was fighting with, and so he's the victor. So really see Mother Nature working in these types of environments. And these bears would be going after the murre's eggs and trying to eat their babies as well, because again, they can't go out on the sea ice. Sea ice hasn't formed yet. We also learned... What? I was wondering about that last night if you'd asked me that question. And you know, I don't know. I don't know.
But they'd eat you if they had the
Oh yeah, they would eat me. Yeah, they would eat me. I wonder if vultures or ravens would come and they would peck at the bear, you know, which would be not so good. Or wolves, foxes and wolves would come and scavenge. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure. They would go after bears. Sometimes they'll go after like cubs and stuff. Because we've had bears come through our camp, and we wake up and we see these footprints and we're like, whoa, and you'll see it must have been a mother, because then there's a little print, or there's a little print and a big print behind it. And then you'll see another print. And what happened one time was a mother was trying to get her baby cub away from this other male cub, or this male bear, because he was coming after them. So they didn't bother with us that day, which was good. But yeah, they'll go after the cubs. So we also learned about the history and the culture. Here we are in Iqaluit at the government chambers. And I just show you all these seats are made out of seal skin. So, you know, seal hunting is very traditional, very important part of the Inuit culture. Lots of carvings in the middle of the chamber here. You can see the shape of the chamber is like an igloo. We were also welcomed at the Iqaluit Museum by the Assistant Minister of the Environment. We also were welcomed by the director, Mary Ellen Thomas. She's in Nunavut Research Institute. But delegates were also free to walk around the museum and learn about the art and the culture of the Inuit here. And outside, we could also see some of the graffiti, which I thought was pretty cool. So that was neat. And I'll come back to Kekerton Island here again. This was about 50 kilometers southeast of Pangnirtung. And I'm pretty good, eh? No, that's not me. That's not me. That's a grad student. I think it would break my back or something. Now, whaling in the Arctic in the Canadian water started, I think, about 1820. They didn't start here. They started more up north of Baffin Island and Lancaster Sound and maybe Pond Inlet. And it was very dangerous. They took about 13,000 whales. So they killed a lot of bowhead whales, but they also lost a lot of ships and they lost a lot of men. I think in one year they lost like 17 ships. So it's a very dangerous business. And then they decided, well, this is getting a bit much, and maybe we should find some quieter waters to come to and overwinter. So I think it was William Penny. He was a Scottish whaler. He found this site along Cumberland Sound. And so he formed this station, I think it was in maybe 1850 or so. And this is where they would overwinter. Now, at the time they came here, there was about 1,000 Inuit in the area along Cumberland Sound. And because there were so many Americans, the British, the Scottish in here whaling, they got smallpox, they got other diseases, and the population went down to about 350 Inuit. But these were the pots that they would render the whale blubber in. They're still there. So this is a protected site, actually. Here's some of the tools that they would have for that whaling. A lot of hoops along the caps. And because you have permafrost and the ground above it only freezes, you only have a shallow area which freezes and thaws every year, you can't, when somebody dies, you can't really stick them in the ground. So you stick them in these old barrels. So we found a lot of bones in these barrels. So there they are. Interesting site, though. I'd like to come back now to the importance of this meeting. I was really proud that we had an open house in Pangnirtung, and the people in Pangnirtung were really glad to have us. Again, we had all the chief delegates from every circumpolar country. We had the elders coming in to talk with us. We talked about some water issues. How can we improve knowledge in the north about water resources? Where are we going? What are the impacts of climate change? And we also talked about what happened during that big rain on snowmelt flood that they had. The year before, in 2008, it was the early part of June, they had about, I think it was 50, 60 millimeters of rain fell within a very short period of time. At that time, they still had a snowpack. The snowpack was ripening. The temperatures increased from about 8 to 13 degrees C. And then they had high winds. Because they're in a mountainous area, they had Chinook winds. The winds, same types of winds that you would get in Calgary. So they had a very rapid melt. And the runoff in the Duvall River was so great that it cut down into the permafrost about 10 meters. And it took out 2 bridges, and it took out it eroded around some foundations of some buildings as well. Now, for 2 weeks, people were without water, without sewage, and they couldn't go to the dump sites. And some of the Inuit had to shuffle people across in their boats from one area of the town to another area. And I think when we were there, the bridge was getting fixed, and it was costing like $5 or $6 million. And you figure that all of that had to be flown in or boated in as well. So it's very costly. So this is the workshop, and it was hosted by York University. I was very proud that it was hosted by York University. I say that because Carleton was going to host it, and they pulled out at the last minute, and York came in. So I was very happy about that. So we had a large number of people there, and the elders told us about, some things that were concerning them. They talked about higher sea levels. They talked about how the color of the water was different. I mean, that was out of my field, so Robbie McDonald would address that. They talked about how they couldn't go out on the land. It was later in the spring that they could go out on the land, and then their time on the land was shorter. So they have been affected by recent changes in the climate. And here I've just got a plaque of thanks for the community. I'm with Mayor's. He's down here. And then we had a number of elders here as well. So a very welcoming community. They made us bannock as well, so that was nice. So just to prove that we did some work on this meeting, we had a number of science sessions, and I won't read them all, but we did cover a lot of material within we were there from the 12th to the 18th. So 6 days. We had a number of paper sessions. We had 2 guest speakers. We had a poster session, and we had the 2 workshops, one in Pangnirtung and one on board, where we talked about prediction in ungauged basins. We also had Rick Janowitz is with the Yukon government, and he got some money from the Yukon for this meeting, but of course he had to talk about the Yukon and what they're doing with water in this area. Him and his wife had also gone along the pass in Iqaluit National Park, so he showed us slides of that, and that was amazing. We also had IPY. We were right in the middle of the International Polar Year, so we had 2 slideshows by 2 amazing snow hydrologists. Glenn Liston, he talked about his travels, looking at snowpacks, contaminants towards the South Pole. And Matthew Sturm, who is a well-known snow hydrologist out of Alaska, he talked about snow cover changes from Fairbanks to Churchill. And he went on a skidoo for a few weeks, and they skidooed across that area, the barren areas, taking measurements along the way, as Glenn traveled as well with the Norwegians. So all of our papers were in this proceedings, and they're published on the website if you want to go in there and find our research. So it's there. We also published our papers after the proceedings into the journal Hydrology Research, and we circulated the proceedings to the government water resource managers across Canada who found it quite helpful. We did outreach with the communities in Iqaluit. I talked to CBC Radio North as well, so they would get that information across to all of the Inuit communities or whoever was listening on the radio. And we had that workshop in Pangnirtung. And this is Sim here. He helped me organize that meeting. The meetings are important. They're small. This, even though it was one of the largest ones that they had, we had about 69 participants, you're able to foster interactions and collaborations. We brought people that hadn't worked together for many, many years. Here's Lawrence Mysick, very famous oceanographer. Here's Ray Bradley, very famous climatologist out of the University of Massachusetts. So they started talking again and thinking about new projects. We also brought the North, you could say, more southern scientists up to the Arctic. We also brought circumpolar scientists across to this region of Canada. And it also allows time for Canadian scientists to talk to each other as well. People that have expertise, Phil Marsh in the low Arctic, northwestern part of Canada. Here we have Bill Quinton. Bill Quinton, he's in the subarctic. And then Scott Lamoureux is up in the same area that I work up in high Arctic on Melville Island. So it allows time to talk. It's also important for mentoring and training. Glenn Liston is an amazing snow hydrologist, and he has this wonderful snow model, a blowing snow model, snowmelt model that we all use. Even the Norwegians use it, and they make a lot of money using it. They use it to figure out how much snow is in their basin, you know, the rate of melting, and that water goes into those reservoirs which generate hydroelectric power. And the Norwegians are pretty clever, and they sell that power. And they have a lot of money right now. And I think that we have to learn how to do things maybe better too in the North. Robbie McDonald, he's an physical oceanographer, but he's also, his interests are in carbon flow and how much carbon is moving out into the Arctic Ocean and how that affects circulation patterns. My own student is interested in carbon moving from terrestrial areas into Arctic ponds and then out into the Arctic Ocean. So he spent a lot of time with my PhD student talking to her. We had about, I'd say we had about 10 graduate students with us. This opens them up to some of the best hydrology experts across Canada and across the circumpolar Arctic, and it helps them in their own careers. Robin Thorne is now a PhD student in McMaster University. May Guan, she was one of my students a long time ago. She's now a research scientist out in the University of Saskatchewan, working a lot out in Kananaskis. Okay, I come back to this quote as well. It's not an organization, nor is it funded by any international agency. Its success, again, is entirely due to the strong interest and commitment of an ever-evolving group of Northern Basin researchers. And that's really what the NRB is all about and what we aim to do. So I'd just like to thank you and just point out again, the NRB is just another circle of friends. So thanks very much.